was still a student at American University in Washington, D.C. I always had a special liking for birds, and when I found this poor dead bird, I painted its portrait as a kind of memorial. As a student, I was reading Shakespeare's poem, Phoenix and the Turtle, and the line, "For this dead bird sigh a prayer," became the title. I've used literary titles a lot ever since. Sacred Landscape with 3 letter M's. Soon after returning from World War II and finishing college, I created a series of works about the demise of civilizations. This is one of the early sketches for a long series of rather mystic-looking landscapes. The ancient Chinese always placed more emphasis on landscape than the human figure, on the macrocosm rather than the microcosm. That 3-pronged organic form I call a hydroform, after the microscopic hydra that easily regenerates itself. The letter M's, of course, stand for Martin. I was thankful that I had survived the war. This is the Sacred Landscape, one of the first Sacred Landscape paintings. It eventually wound up in the collection of Dr. G. Greenbaum, the famous dentist who took care of so many of the early abstract expressionists in exchange for paintings. Willem de Kooning painted his portrait, and when Jack worked on my teeth, I gave him this painting. The hydroform on the left has little holy men in each sprout. Seed-like forms in the underground bud float osmotically into the upper sky. This is Sacred Landscape with hydroforms. The hydras were microscopic organisms I used to see in biology class in college. For me, they became a symbol of the ability to suffer great damage and still survive and reproduce. On the left is a cosmic planet against a dark sky, contrasting the whiteness of the primordial earth strata below. From farthest to nearest, it represents the interconnection between worlds, and like male and female, they have generative connotations. Sacred Landscape number 1. By now I realized that the sacred landscapes had special meaning for me and decided to create a series. The earth strata at the bottom contains all kinds of references to past civilizations. The planets are traditional power symbols and relate to the halo around the stick figure, which represents a kind of holy man or man in higher evolution. The skeletal figure just left of the holy man is mortal man, halfway between the earth strata and the upper regions or heavens toward which he aspires. The hydroform, symbol of regeneration, also exists between the 2 regions. Sacred Landscape, Holy Man in Ellipse. The Holy Man took on an atomic-style halo, and the cosmic planet has a sunspot. The sunspots are centers of magnetic storms, and they got a lot of press coverage in the early 1950s. Sacred Landscape number 3. The hydroform is on the left. The same stick figure, Holy Man, now has a gold halo. And on the right, a sequence of fires just below the sun-like planet. The fires, like the planet, are positive symbols, signs of purification rather than destruction symbols. Leslie Judd Allender, critic for the Washington Times-Herald, which later became the Washington Post, wrote, "He combines the simplicity of large planes with extraordinary, delicate overlay of line in paintings of magic and emotional imagery. Technically, he is extremely competent." Thank you, Leslie. Sacred Landscape, in the collection of Mr. and Mrs. Gannett Ries of Elmsford, New York. This is one of the many drawings I did of sacred landscapes. It's especially interesting because the planet is huge and seems to be radiating energy and power to the earth, while the hydroform is growing like a follicle from the fertilized earth. Sacred landscape. I eventually did an etching of the sacred landscape. It becomes a very important emblem for me and not only crops up in my later work, but also I use it as a logo on my stationery and in my web page. King and State, Through the First Gate. This is 1956. My wife, my one-year-old daughter, and I moved to Spain for a year, where I had an exhibition in Madrid. I was greatly impressed by the preservation of their past, as well as the remains of some of their kings. This fitted in with my feelings about the demise of civilizations and peoples. The king is a traditional symbol of authority, as well as a universal and archetypal man. Through the First Gate is an archaic term for dying or passing. It implies that there are more gates. Work sketch, King with halberd. I always made a lot of studies and sketches for my work. The rib cage became especially interesting as an artistic form. It began to transform into a variation on the hydroform as it splayed out into an explosive symbol of regeneration. The halberd, medieval and sacred. The halberd was an axe-like weapon for hacking through armor and helmets. As its symbol, it can be regarded as a counter to sovereign authority, helmets, and crowns. The detail shows some of the intricate and delicate overlay of line. Medieval halberd, 1958. Another halberd which shows the medieval and early Renaissance interest in decoration and adornment for everything, including instruments of war. This painting is now in the Corcoran Museum in Washington, D.C. In the maze and widening labyrinths of the world and of the mind, 1968. Since I was proficient in most aspects of drawing, painting, and printmaking, I decided to get a master's degree in art history. My thesis was about the legend of the Minotaur from ancient Egyptian and Greek times to the present. I fell in love not only with art history, but also with all the images I was investigating. I started making photographic silk screens of some of the images and printing them into my own work, and also began developing poetic titles rather than the more descriptive ones. Ancient Labyrinth of Our Apocalypse. This is the use of the labyrinth myth in conjunction with current tragedy, in this case the assassination of President Kennedy. A review in Arts magazine stated that I achieved an inordinately psychic tension by multiple imagery of collage and silkscreen printing of art history. Not empty-handed in an endless continuum. 1970. The first silk screen I ever made was of a king giving his heart to his queen. I made it as a Valentine gift for my wife. The image is from a medieval tapestry. This is an early painting in which I printed the king and queen in conjunction with some of the Egyptian hieroglyphs left over from my art history thesis. Indifferent to creation and small tragedies. The use of two Picasso lovers separated by Egyptian hieroglyphs. This is in the collection of Kurt Del Banco in New York City. Circular pattern of radial whorl, a six-color silkscreen print. The image at the bottom is one of Picasso's first impressions he made for Guernica. Like most artists at that time, I was obsessed with Picasso, and this is one of the paintings I was analyzing for my art history thesis. At the top is the Picasso Lovers, and in red is Titian's Venus of Urbino, a precursor of Edouard Manet's Olympia, which was the beginning of 19th century Impressionism. Endless in the confines of our continuum, a double print of German soldiers going off to World War I. Everyone at that time thought it would be a short, patriotic, glorious war. It led to World War II. The two images are separated by Egyptian hieroglyphics, meaning human nature is the same from prehistory to post-history. Unfortunately, the painting was stolen from a gallery in New York. I've had quite a few paintings stolen. Thieves seem to love my work. Love in Continuum. I've always had a special affection for the passion of medieval art. The head of Christ is from a damaged French crucifixion. Below that is a detail of the suffering horse from Picasso's Guernica. And below that is a depiction of the youths and maidens being sacrificed to the Minotaur. Inconstant Delusions, homage to Picasso. At the top is a free-form found object with very interesting texture. I had to soak it in clear acrylic to make it permanent. Just below it is a reproduction of my sacred landscape etching as it appeared in the International Who's Who. At the bottom is Picasso's sketch for Guernica, printed on a separate piece of masonite and floating out from the background. Labyrinths, Playgrounds, and the Noise of the Gods, in the collection of Mr. and Mrs. Kenneth Bruce of Scarsdale, New York. The nude is from a newspaper photograph printed at the height of the Vietnam War. She was evidently on drugs. American and Vietnam soldiers were not the only ones being destroyed. She reminded me of Ariadne. After being abandoned by Theseus, Ariadne embraced the cult of Dionysus, the ancient Greek god who offered ecstasy through wine and drugs. I had been using ideas and images about Ariadne and Theseus since writing my art history thesis on the Minotaur and the Labyrinth. Ariadne upside down means the world upside down, time out of joint. Picasso's Lovers. I use this drawing as a make love, not war statement. The juxtaposition of the young girl as Ariadne and the Picasso lovers point to the social implications of far-off wars. The title poetically refers to the labyrinthine course of life, coupled with the playgrounds, read war games, and noise that the gods visit upon us. In other words, everything from the laughter of children to the moans of the dying and the orations of politicians. In Gravitational Homage, an early homage to Raphael. Like Picasso, he was a prodigy revered by his contemporaries, and he absorbed all the latest Renaissance ideas. But he died young. Picasso lived for almost a century. Fatigued Rationality, homage to Raphael. The phrase fatigued rationality was coined by a French art historian, either André Malraux or Élie Faure, I don't remember. It's in reference to the decline of Renaissance classicism and the beginnings of the non-classical styles that culminated in the modern movements. There's an image of Raphael at the top, Picasso's Lovers again, and below that a drawing of Ariadne based on the Hellenistic sculpture in the Vatican collection, and then the three-dimensional hand at the bottom of this totemic structure, which symbolizes craft and creation and denounces the overhead images. According to psychologist Carl Jung, a hand has generative connotations, and the fingers do make it look a little like my hydroform. And this painting is in the collection of the Housatonic Museum in Connecticut. Vortex Beyond the Empire of Strife. Ariadne in blue on the left from a Renaissance drawing, facing Picasso's totemic bull. At bottom left is a small collage of one of Georges Braque's celebrated birds. In his notebooks, Braque wrote, "Unceasingly we run after our destiny," unquote. Image and thought are a unity, homage to Titian and Jasper Johns. I like the idea of a simple kitchen knife suspended out from the painting. When I remembered that Jasper Johns had used some kitchen utensils in his work, I decided to pay homage to him along with Titian's Venus of Urbino. I relished the contrast between the classical and the contemporary. Privileged Intuitions, homage to Picasso. I had a large piece of burlap, which reminded me of our stay in Spain. I wanted to include it in a painting with Picasso's Guernica, so that it took up most of the space. The detail of the woman with the lamp from Guernica is on a separate panel and extends out from the painting about 1 inch. Them to Men's Eyes, homage to Picasso's Lovers. The title is from Hamlet when he says, "Foul deeds will rise, though all the earth overwhelm them to men's eyes," unquote. I took the last 4 words and eliminated the comma, turning the phrase into an abstraction. But the beauty of the words is still there. A detail of Picasso's Lovers and an abstract detail. Transfers Lovers into Loved, homage to Titian. A screen print of Titian's Venus of Urbino is on the round mandala form, upper right. The mandala is an ancient Eastern ritual form related to the sun, the halo, and the labyrinth. It has both religious and therapeutic connotations. The line "transfers lover into loved" is from Chaucer. Loved be with equal crime. The title is from a poem by Spenser. I've never been able to figure out exactly what it means, which is one reason I like it, but it seems to mean something about the secrecy of love-making. Mechanism of Vertebrates, homage to Leonardo da Vinci. The Da Vinci drawing is from his study for the Adoration of the Magi. Da Vinci was one of my early heroes and influences. I even read that huge biography by Dmitri Merezhkovsky when I was still in high school. Beyond the Bricks, homage to Carl Andre. Carl Andre is the famous minimal sculptor. I gave him his first show in 1964 at the Hudson River Museum when I was assistant director. I later wrote an article about his work and supported him in a letter to the New York Times when the Tate Gallery in London bought one of his works. The Times editor entitled my letter "Beyond the Bricks," thus my title when I made this work 20 years later. Carl's letter included a poem for the exhibition catalog. The cubes, or bricks if you will, are over 2 inches deep and refer to Carl's minimal sculpture. Divine Fluidity, homage to Picasso's Guernica. The detail from Picasso's Guernica is printed on a separate sheet of plastic and it extends out from the background about 1 inch. The mandala form above is like a planet in turmoil as the carnage befalls the Spanish town. Eyes Without Ecstasy, in a private collection in New York. Picasso's Guernica takes on a completely different feeling when it's in relation to other images, other colors, placement, etc. At the top is an early black and white reproduction of one of my sacred landscapes between 2 images of Titian's Venus of Urbino. Mudra of the Principle. 2 more homages to Titian, this time with the word mudra in the title. Mudra is a Buddhist term used in a lot of Far Eastern art. It refers to a ritualistic hand gesture which symbolizes the functions of the deities. I used it here to represent a sacred modesty gesture. A few centuries later, the Impressionist painter Edouard Manet used this same gesture in his Olympia as a protest against the degradation of women in the 19th century. Mudra, the sense of signs, homage to Titian's Venus of Urbino. According to the psychiatrist Carl Jung, the hand has a generative connotation. Wandering through the uncut labyrinths. Another use of Guernica. Each time it has a different feel, a different meaning in relation to the rest of the painting. A close-up of Guernica, the first drawing Picasso made on the canvas, and another detail. Here's Jackson Pollock, Gathered to the Eyes. I first heard of Pollock when I was still in college, and I've been fascinated by his work ever since. Here I've juxtaposed him with the labyrinth. Art critic Noel Frackman has commented on my balance of complex visual imagery and striking design. Close-up of Pollock with a halo-like labyrinth, unborrowed from the eye, homage to Jackson Pollock. I loved his drip paintings. I made a kind of dribble for the background of this painting with very gelatinous paint so that the dribbles are about an inch thick. The photo silkscreen of Pollock is on an elliptical panel sticking out about 5 inches from the background. When I showed this to one dealer, he said Pollock wouldn't paint that way. I tried to explain that this was a homage, not a forgery. Close-up of Pollock. Encircling Mandala of Spring, homage to Andy Warhol. I liked the idea of Andy's using a magazine picture of flowers and transforming it into a work of art. The photographer wasn't happy about that appropriation and sued. But after all, the photographer appropriated it from Mother Nature. Then Andy appropriated it from the photograph, so I appropriated it from Andy. Process as performance, homage to Paul Klee. Paul Klee has always been one of my favorite artists. He's philosophical with a sense of humor. The portentous administrator on the bottom is reading the latest decree on high from a large imposing scroll, or maybe it's a user's manual. The man above him is upside down and getting it all wrong while he inflicts it on the little guy at the top who, like Charlie Chaplin, manages to carry on and juggle his life and his dilemmas in spite of everything. The fancy round mandala, like a sun or a planet, reiterates the little balls that the juggler manages. They hold each other apart in their places. Klee's jugglers bear repeating, even peeking through a fractured found object at the top. Oceanic Feeling. This print is in the New York Public Library print collection. The Da Vinci figure is overlooking my sacred landscape. Enigmatic of what one thinks. Two Paul Klee works juxtaposed against my abstract background. The images take on new meanings when the worldly jugglers are overseen by Klee's creative spirit. In the Light of Thought, a combination of my Sacred Landscape logo and the poem that Carl Andre wrote, which ended up in my painting as well as several prints, as here. The Sky of Centuries. I use my logo quite often. Here I enlarged it and doubled it. This print is about 35 inches long. The modern world needs such a ragbag to stuff all its thought in. 1991. This is a long 72-inch panel, but only 6 inches high. The title is from Ezra Pound. He wrote that line long before personal computers became available. Here's a close-up of one of the words, which is in the title, of course. And here is the end.